if it harms their reputation. So, knowing that Smartmatic software was not used across the US, these false allegations from the Trump legal team sound especially defamatory.
They were founded as a company to fix elections, and they are extremely hackable.
Smartmatic had switched 6,000 votes from Trump to Biden.
Millions of votes that were shifted by this software that was designed expressly for that purpose. They did this on purpose. It was calculated. They've done it before.
All you had to do is go online and find out that Smartmatic is owned by Venezuelans close to Chavez. You can Google it.
Some right-wing news anchors, including Maria Bartiromo, didn't do a whole lot to push back.
We have so much evidence, I feel like it's coming in through a fire hose.
Wow.
And some of the statements they were willing to read from the teleprompter are pretty incredible.
The Smartmatic software that may have actually changed votes from President Trump and given them to Joe Biden.
Meddling in the latest U.S. election through a company called Smartmatic.
Tied to billionaire George Soros.
It's quite the catalog of inflammatory claims, and Smartmatic has a really good lawyer. J. Eric Connolly previously represented Beef Products Incorporated in their defamation suit against ABC News, which repeatedly called their product Pink Slime. They won a massive settlement of $177 million. He's already sent retraction demands to each of these networks. That legal threat prompted 3 of the 4 networks to backtrack, attempting to retract the statements that some people made about Smartmatic.
And recent claims.
And the claims some have made.
And the claims some have made about that company.
And Newsmax would like to clarify its news coverage and note that it has not reported as true certain claims made about these companies.
I have not seen any evidence that Smartmatic software was used to delete, change, alter anything related to vote tabulation.
Neither Dominion nor Smartmatic has any relationship with George Soros.
Notably, OAN did not walk back their claims, instead mocking their competitor Newsmax for succumbing to legal pressure.
I don't think Newsmax had to retract or correct their statement.
Of course, retraction demands are just the beginning. Smartmatic's competitor Dominion this week filed a defamation lawsuit against Sidney Powell. They're seeking $1.3 billion in damages. So, have any of these right-wing news personalities learned to be more careful with what they say? Here's Maria Bartiromo immediately following the Smartmatic apology segment.
So that is where we stand right now. We will keep investigating.
Yeah, so is that really the only way to address it, through defamation lawsuits? You think?
No, definitely not. No, certainly not. I mean, part of the reason why that we have this right-wing media ecosystem now is because of certain policy changes that were instituted, over the course of the 70s and the 80s. One of which is the removal of things like the fairness doctrine, which once mandated that basically news agencies had to more or less give 2 sides of an issue rather than just sort of report from one kind of biased side. The removal of that really opened the door for hardcore partisan news agencies like we have now. And I think the other thing is that there's this enormous concentration of media ownership right now. That really, that's just gone out the window in terms of the conversation, in terms of the power of these media companies. It's now overwhelmingly focused on just sort of censoring social media instead of looking at ways to limit the size and the power and the influence of these media companies like Fox, but also outlets like CNN and MSNBC. That's all sort of gone out the window, but that was in conversation for a long time, and for good reason. And I think, would it solve every problem that we're talking about here? No, obviously not. I think to really solve these problems, you would have to fix the crisis of legitimacy and just the general decay and inequality that is plaguing American society. However, if you were to take anti-monopoly action against the television media business, and even things like radio, and institute things like the fairness doctrine and other kind of positive mandates, affirmative mandates that will ensure more balanced coverage, you would at least go some way towards addressing this. And I think personally, in a better way, in a more constructive way, where you wouldn't risk massive government censorship, which is something that we want to really steer clear of.
Yeah, certainly. And so we've seen where this has brought us to. I mean, in terms of actual effect and the dangers that it provides directly on our democracy, it's quite clear that this kind of misinformation, disinformation, conspiracy theories, call it fake news if you're on the Trump train, but essentially it's becoming a huge problem, existential problem for our democracies. And there's an interesting article that I will link below, that written by Andrew Marantz, how social media made the Trump insurrection a reality, and it's an interesting read. So basically, let's see. We basically spoke about the background. What is the is the conspiracy theory, in your opinion, the susceptibility? Is it mainly a thing of the right, or is it?
No, definitely not. No, I mean, like, again, conspiracy theories have always been with us, and they've come from all sides. I think currently, right now, we're looking at the rise of right-wing conspiracy theories. But even at this current moment, it's not really the case that it's exclusive to the right. And one example I would point to is the Russiagate controversy. Not the narrow question of collusion, whether or not the Trump campaign knowingly, took or used the help of some Russian operatives to win the election. That's you can make a case for that, I think, but though I think it's less interesting. But I'm more talking about the more maximalist charge that was leveled at Trump by Democrats and really still believed in by a lot of Democratic voters, and that's the idea that Vladimir Putin was literally controlling or blackmailing or in some way influencing Trump to do the things that he did. And this was a all-encompassing conspiracy theory that plagued the liberal mindset for basically 4 years until finally the election happened. There was no basis for it. There were certain bits of misinformation that kind of backed it up, things like the Steele dossier, but the evidence for it was very thin. And as the years went by, as Trump assumed the presidency, it got even thinner because Trump would do things that were very contrary to Russian interests, whether trying to push Putin out of the European natural gas market, or going after Venezuela and Syria, which are the allies of Russia, or tearing up arms agreements that Putin was quite keen to hang on to. As time went on, these things mounted, and yet people continued to be fed, mostly through TV, the idea that this was all of Putin's doing, including not just with Trump, but even some of the protests that we saw. I mean, there was a widespread idea pushed on print media and on television by kind of anti-Trump news outlets that the anti-police brutality protests, the reason they happened was because of Russian Facebook memes, and that because Russia was trying to sow division, that's why people were protesting things like inequality and police brutality, which is quite absurd, but a genuine belief that was held by people and that was pushed by outlets that we would not consider fringe outlets. These are some of the most mainstream, well-established legacy news outlets. So I to some extent it is worrying that we're kind of just ping-ponging between kind of liberal conspiracy theories and then right-wing ones, and then maybe back again. We'll see. There isn't really a focus on what what we can actually do to fix the crisis of inequality and political legitimacy that I think is driving the acceptance of all these things.
So, Branko, what about the politicians who are originating or amplifying this disinformation?
Yeah, and obviously they bear a large, degree of blame for this. I mean, I think that the decision to impeach Trump is a good one. I think that maybe the narrow reason they've chosen, which is that he incited a riot. I don't know if I would probably broaden it. I would just say his attempts to just fraudulently overturn the election in general, his constant lying about this since the election. I think that is probably a better and bigger grounds to do it. But I think nonetheless that is a good reason. Some of the measures that have been floated, like expelling members of Congress who objected to the election result, I think it's well-meaning. I think it's obviously these people are incredibly irresponsible, and they know what they're doing, and they should be at the very least censured. But the idea of expelling them, I think that's a bit of a dangerous precedent, because if you pass a law like that, well, it's very easy to see that being used in a way that the people who are supporting such a law don't want it to be used. For instance, if Republicans ever tried to overturn an election result that didn't go their way again, and it was and this time maybe it was a GOP-controlled Congress, and this time it was Democrats and liberals who were objecting and saying, "Well, hold on, this is there really was fraud in this case, and when we object to this process, then that law could be used against them." To remove them from power. So I think we have to be a little bit careful with some of the consequences here. But certainly, I think this is one of these things where it requires a political solution. I mean, the Republican Party has to be defeated. It is easily the most extreme right-wing major party, probably in the Western world, and certainly to have the power that it does. And it's so extreme even that the people who vote for it don't believe in its own policies. They when they hear what the Republican politicians actually want to do, they think, well, that can't be true because that's crazy. So I think in this case it will have to be a political solution, and that comes from organizing from the grassroots on up, and winning elections, winning power in local and races and state houses and Congress, and shifting politics so that people like this can't do what they are trying to do again.
No, I've heard a counter argument to that is, if you allow these people not to be expelled, they can run as a continuation for Trump in 2024, which is an interesting. It's I think a bit of a concern. And Marantz in his article makes the point that you should apply the principles of libel. If you can apply libel, meaning there is a contradiction of facts, then you could act on basis of that as part of impeachment or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that argument. I think the problem is that again, there's the question of politics. Okay, let's say you expel these Republicans. Not only do you set the precedent that can be used against Democrats later on, but the problem isn't just these individual Republicans. If they're expelled, there's a whole army of people that have been lied to and deluded by the media, by the conservative movement, the right-wing movement of the United States more generally, that will be ready to take their place. And at the end of the day, whoever has political power will be able to use these things in whatever way they see fit, even if we disagree with the definition of libel or what counts as libel. Even if we say, well, the Democrats objecting to, future Republican attempts to steal an election, that's not libel because it's actually happening. ultimately that doesn't really matter, because it's the people who hold political power who will decide what's in essence true or not. And so I think ultimately this is a political question. And while I understand the idea of using some of these legal tools to try and rectify it, I think that will be a short-term solution, because you're never going to that way defeat the larger conservative movement. That is, it's not just Trump. I mean, these ideas have been pushed in conservative circles for years and years. Under Obama, it was not that long ago that right-wing media and Republicans were essentially calling him an illegitimate president, accusing him of tyranny, accusing him of establishing a kind of Nazi-like fascist state, calling for or using the rhetoric of armed revolution. So a lot of this stuff is not new. It has come before. And simply expelling these people or taking libel to them, I think, is not going to get rid of the underlying drivers of what is causing this kind of mindset. But I think there's debate to be had about that. I think that's where my thinking is right now. I potentially could be persuaded, but I at the moment I can't really see any sort of much counter argument against that.
Let's talk a little bit about social media and why is social media such a multiplier or a megaphone for conspiracy theories and disinformation?
I think social media primarily because it can be, one, it's very easy to access. It's a public good, or at the very least it should be treated as such. And so it is easy to access. It's easy to you don't have to leave the house. You can access it all from your couch, from your bed. It's very easy to disseminate, which I think is one of the strengths of it as well. I think it's one of the reasons why there has been a flourishing of alternative news media over the last 20 or so years, and particularly over the last 10 years. It's a double-edged sword. The kinds of things about social media that allow ideas to be spread and disseminated very easily and widely, they can be used for good ends, and I would say that things like the magazine I worked for, Jacobin Magazine, I think it has really done well and flourished because of it. But it can also be used for bad ends. It can be used to spread conspiracy theories and all sorts of disinformation. But like I said previously, I mean, I think also the focus on social media, the exclusive focus on it, I think is really missing what I think is probably a bigger ingredient to this stuff, which is television. I mean, television remains the most influential medium, particularly for people over a certain age group. I mean, there was a lot of focus in 2016 and 2017 and beyond about how social media played a role in fostering Trumpism and fostering these right-wing ideas. But the reality of it is, if you looked at surveys and studies, the majority of people, particularly people who are Trump fans, social media was not their main point of news consumption. It was TV, it was local news, it was cable news. And that's sort of becoming the norm for a lot of people, particularly over an age group. And that's why, I would say in many ways that television is a far more radicalizing force, not just in pushing this whole stop the steal movement, this baseless idea of election fraud, but also on the liberal side of things, pushing the idea that Putin was behind anything and everything that was going on in the United States. I mean, I think people are forgetting how much fear-mongering there was on cable news about this stuff. Stories that ended up being false or overblown, but were nonetheless kind of presented to people as very real. So I think we need to, social media is a concern. I think there are definitely measures we can take about that, but I think we need to broaden things a little more and look at the role of other types of media and how they have factored into this.
Okay, but I think what makes social media unique is a couple of things. One is the algorithm that promote these more radical stories because they create more traffic. and the other that you have this feedback loop that doesn't exist in other types of media, where it's coming at you. With regards to social media, it gets enmeshed and filtered through additional interpretations and additional material that kind of colors the whole thing. So you may hear something that is said by a politician, but when it's filtered or characterized in a certain way through a media channel on social media, it fills it out a little bit more and creates additional maybe more extreme point of view, right?
Well, I think that is a good point, and I think the algorithm, for instance, is a really good thing to focus on, because I think that is a very concrete way to affect some of this stuff without resorting to some of the ideas that we're seeing now, which is just basically empowering tech oligarchs to just be able to silence people whenever they want, or censor certain news stories, or what have you. You're giving these unaccountable entities a tremendous amount of power over media consumption and over democracy. So I think the algorithm issue is a very good one. I think it does not need to be the way it's designed now, where it seems like just staying on YouTube, for instance, will inevitably take you down a more kind of darker and conspiratorial path. As you say, that exists because of reasons for traffic, but it doesn't have to be. And I think one of the issues here is that, look, I mean, these are private companies. I think we're now starting to realize how powerful and influential these companies are in political discourse, and that we have very little oversight of them. And we have very little input into the decisions they make. I mean, in fact, we almost have no input. These things are decided behind closed doors without any of our kind of input or ideas being put in there as people as people part of a democracy. So there has to be some questions about, should the internet and social media companies continue to be considered as private entities that can just do whatever they want, aside from just sort of responding to pressure from the public and the government, or is this a public utility that requires some governmental oversight? And I think that's the direction we have to move in.
And that's something where a lot of progressives, and we're struggling with that as progressives, because on the one hand we see the slippery slide of where things can go when conspiracy theories are let to go rampant and lies are not not opposed. And on the other side of it, we are concerned about our own freedom of speech and how promoting ideas that are not in the mainstream or not corporately sponsored would be affected. So this caricature here, for example, was the guy who put that caricature, drew the caricature, had their account suspended, and on the one hand, there's a core of truth there, right? Because we have right now a situation where these companies decide what is appropriate, what should be taken off, which accounts should be blocked, and what should be not, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely, and that's affected people on the left, as much as on the right. I mean, the idea that censorship is only going to be used on the right, it's ironically an idea that is believed by both liberals and by conservatives. Conservatives have this sort of victim attitude, and they believe that they are being uniquely persecuted by social media, which isn't true. There's a lot of progressive and left-wing voices that have been taken off social media, had their posts censored. One very good example is the way that in the wake of 2016, over the panic of fake news, social media companies like Google, Facebook, and the like, they changed some of the way that stories are shared. Google changed its algorithm to kind of prioritize more authoritative sources, meaning things like the New York Times and Washington Post over more independent news outlets, and progressive ones. And a lot of progressive and left-wing websites actually sort of traffic plummet because of this. And so, meanwhile, social media or anti-fake news laws that have been passed in certain countries have actually been used against the left because they've been, certain websites or videos have been declared violent or revolutionary and then taken down. Germany is a very good example. In Germany, once they passed this law that aimed to curb fake news and misinformation, they actually took down a far left website because they claimed that it was, violent and it was pushing for violent revolution. You've also got things where the wrong videos have been taken down because, of course, this kind of censorship, it's not exact. It's often done by people who are making split-second decisions who don't have the time to maybe study something. So as one example, a video was taken down on YouTube that was from the outlet Project Syndicate that was discussing the rise of Holocaust denial, and the YouTube or the German authorities rather censored it. They took down access to it because they said, or they thought, that it was actually promoting Holocaust denial. And this is something that we've seen quite a bit, where just mistakes are made and the wrong things are censored. So I think that's a really important thing that people should think about. It's not going to these powers, these authorities to censor. They're not going to be limited to the right. They're going to be used against other things. One example is the anti-police brutality protests, which a wide spectrum of people during 2020. I mean, I agreed with them, and I imagine many people watching this did, but a lot of people were using the same kinds of words that we're hearing now used against this Capitol Hill riot, insurrection, terrorism. And you can make the case that, because even though they were largely peaceful, because they were isolated incidents of violence, well, this is something to curb unrest that was plaguing cities. You have to start clamping down on information about, police brutality or protests that are being organized around the country against police brutality and so on and so forth. So I think we need to be a little less reactive and knee-jerk. I think we have to look at things in a more long-term way, because this stuff always does end up boomeranging against the left and other groups.
And just to remind everybody, it's not a position that necessarily these media companies wanted to be in. I remember, like in 2018 or 19, Zuckerberg was being questioned about it. He was reluctant to introduce any censorship, and he was attacked because he was reluctant. Here's what he said back then.
Mark Zuckerberg doubling down on Facebook's controversial decision not to fact-check Facebook ads from political candidates.
We think people should be able to see for themselves what politicians are saying.
At a carefully orchestrated event at Georgetown University, Zuckerberg used teleprompters to give a 35-minute speech on freedom of expression, revealing for the first time how close he came to banning political ads entirely.
I've considered whether we should stop allowing them altogether. From a business perspective, the controversy certainly is not worth the very small part of our business that they make up.
Last month, President Trump's campaign stirring up controversy for using the platform to share misinformation on Hunter Biden in Ukraine through a campaign ad. Now, the Biden campaign striking back on Zuckerberg's speech, saying his choice to cloak Facebook's policy in a feigned concern for free expression demonstrates how unprepared his company is for this unique moment in our history. After Zuckerberg invoked Martin Luther King Jr. for freedom of expression, Twitter lit up with this critique from the civil rights leader's daughter, Bernice King. I'd like to help Facebook better understand the challenges MLK faced from disinformation campaigns launched by politicians. These campaigns created an atmosphere for his assassination. The war of words comes as Republicans rail against Facebook for allegedly censoring conservative views.
Tech censorship.
Zuckerberg saying this to Dana Perino on Fox News.
Kamala Harris has said that she thinks that Twitter should shut down President Trump's account. Like, do you think that's a ridiculous idea?
In a democracy, I don't think that we want private companies censoring politicians in the news.
And we all know this is where it went. So, yeah, it's a very tricky thing. But if not the social media companies, then who should be in charge of that? Do you think that perhaps there should be another branch of government that is journalistic or informationalist or whatever you would call it? So you would have executive, legislative, judiciary, and informationary, and you would have people who could be elected based on their ability to for objectivism and professionalism, and we would have to trust them. Or is that also too close to government? Or should there be like a third-party crowdsourcing system where people would just the public would decide what's correct and what's not?
I think if you're going to reorganize the entire government and add a fourth branch, I think a much better effort in that case would just be to completely overhaul the U.S. electoral system. I mean, we have to remember this is a relative minority of the country that believes in this stuff and supports it. And the only reason that it has gained any traction is because the right-wing or the conservative parts of the country have disproportionate power in the U.S. Political system. Not to even get started on the election system, which is completely archaic and has all these hinge points that Republicans have tried to use this year and last year to overturn the election. So I think if we were talking about actually overhauling the entire government, that is a much better thing to focus on. But in some of what you were saying in terms of having a more public oversight board, I think that isn't the worst thing. I think, again, looking at things like reinstating the fairness doctrine, which existed in the United States for years, would be another thing to look at, and other kind of affirmative regulations that would ensure balance and fairness in the media. And again, using anti-monopoly power to break up some of these massive media conglomerates in television and print, and to make them smaller to reduce the power and influence they have. I think those are all things that are worth looking at.
And what we're seeing basically now is these because of these blockings that's kind of happening organically. We see people on the right flocking to other platforms where they're not being censored. Like they tried to go to Parler, that got shut down, but there's others, and I think it's like a cat and mouse game. They can go to any place like Discord or Gab or whatever one of many different things. So that's not going to change that either. Lastly, I wanted to ask you, what about political literacy? Should it be mandatory part of schooling?
Oh yeah, absolutely. But I mean, I think everyone should have a not just a political, but a robust historical education. I don't know if education is the issue here, though. I mean, it's not clear to me how much the people who were storming the Capitol or what have you were necessarily uneducated. There are a lot of educated conservatives, educated Republicans who nonetheless believe in a lot of this stuff, who believe that the election was rigged and so on and so forth. I think the problem here is something much bigger. Again, it's that crisis of legitimacy. It's the feeling that the government does not work for people. Some of these people that were there in the Capitol last week, of course, were there people who were very wealthy? Definitely. But there were also people who had personal problems of their own, issues with schooling and being able to get proper childcare and all this kind of stuff. And then they turned their resentment and their disappointment and they channeled it into this conspiracy theory about QAnon, which is that the idea that the reason that their lives are worse is because the cannibal pedophile elite had taken the resources that were due for the people and used it for their own sinister ends. So I think again we have to look at this in a much broader way. We have to look at this as a political crisis whose solution is going to be political, and the way that's going to be solved is if people are concerned about this, they need to get organized in their local communities in the same way that the right has been doing for decades. They need to start forming pressure groups, maybe get involved, politically themselves, and really start trying to transform the United States from the bottom up, because this stuff is not going to be solved. It would be nice. It would be very easy and convenient if we could just think that we could just use some laws to solve this massive conundrum that exists. But it's a much bigger effort. It has to be solved politically, and that's a much harder and longer effort that has to be done, and it requires a lot more on the ground work. So I think if people are looking for a solution, they should join civic society groups. They should join things like the Democratic Socialists of America and other groups like that, and work to change the politics of this country rather than kind of just using a sledgehammer to try and break some of the stuff apart.
Okay, perhaps that's more my own perspective, because I've had discussions with people about particular conspiracy theories, and I had a sense that there's not enough political literacy in the sense that people don't know how to evaluate the truth of certain claims, and that is to me a very scary thing, because if you can buy a lie that is a made-up lie and not be able to really evaluate it based on logic and fact, then anything could happen from there. I mean, you saw those people in the Capitol. They truly believed that there was massive fraud and that Trump won by a landslide. And the conclusion, if that was my conclusion, I probably would be. I would be very agitated, and I'm not sure if I took it to that level, but I would be motivated to be much more violent than if I didn't.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, to some extent, you can. I think there were some people there who were genuinely just out for some organized political violence that was very alarming, but I think a lot of people there were lied to. They've been lied to for months, even years, and they saw themselves as doing the work of patriots. As deluded as that is, and as misguided as it is, that happens. That is the authorities they trusted told them that, and I mean I think that is the issue. I mean, people in 2003, majority of people believed that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, and that he was linked to Al-Qaeda, he was linked to 9/11, and people were sold in this war, this catastrophic war that destroyed a country and that threw an entire region of the world into complete chaos. And so, in many ways, it's just this stuff is now it's being directed within the United States instead of without, but it's always been with us. In many ways, I mean, I think I'm more optimistic now because there is a diffusion of news sources and authorities, through the internet. Because of a relatively open internet, we've been able to have alternatives to the corporate media to kind of correct some of these assumptions. And unfortunately, it is part of human nature that we will seek out news authorities that will confirm our biases and confirm the things that we already believe. But I don't think simply censoring things is going to solve that. But I mean, I think political literacy, historical education, it's a place to start. I think that has been one reason why the response to, say, the protests of George Floyd's murder in 2020, I think was such a different response to the kinds of things we saw against protesting and rioting in the 60s and 70s, where there was this really harsh law and order, anti-unrest feeling and direction that the country went in. And that didn't really happen after those protests. So I do think that some of what you're talking about, the political literacy and the historical education, I think that did help. So, it's one tool of many that we should be looking at.
Okay. Well, Branko Marcetic, thank you so much for joining me, and perhaps in a future show we can discuss your book about Biden once his administration gets on track.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. Thank you very much, and have a good night, everybody. See you on the Saturday show with No Joke. Me and Marcus will discuss the weekly events. And please feel free to share this if you like the discussion, and let me know what you think. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Okay.